So we should get started. Hello everybody and welcome to my session. Today I'm going to talk about application virtualization versus application layering. So it's not going to be a boxing fight. I'm just going to talk about the differences, what the use cases are. And I'm also added a little extra content at the end where I'm going to talk about application containers. So before we start, who's using application virtualization? So App-V and ThinApp, please just raise your hand. Anybody using layering, application layering like Unidesk or AppVolumes from VMware? Good. That's probably the reason why you're here, hopefully. So start with the easy part first. Just talk briefly about myself. I work as a senior systems engineer for a company called Exclusive Networks. Dabble with end-user computing stuff like Citrix, VMware, and so on. Work a lot with Microsoft, Azure, pretty much anything. I'm, as we use the Norwegian term, potet. My primary area has been Microsoft and Azure for the last couple of years. And if you want to contact me, you can either contact me on social media. I'll be standing at the Nutanix booth on the expo here for the remainder of the day. And the agenda looks something like this. We're going to talk about where we are today in terms of deployment and application deployment, virtual machine deployment. And I know most of the sessions here are about deploying Windows 10 and System Center Config Manager, so I might step on some toes. And then I'm going to go into the different technologies, application virtualization with FinApp and App-V, and then I'm going to talk about the different layering products. I'm not going to talk about everybody, but I'm going to talk about some of the few chosen partners that I have, and then I'll go into the different demos afterwards and show the differences in terms of features and so on. So, where we are today. This is a terrible visual drawing, by the way, but in terms of deployment, you know, in terms of virtual machine deployment, we have our virtual machine templates, which we deploy using System Center or vCenter or Zen Center or some form of finished template that we have. Virtual machine, which has an operating system installed and a current patch level installed, and we deploy virtual machines based on that template. When we need to update the image, we need to start the virtual machine, install updates, and then new virtual machines will then have the latest patches installed. But the virtual machines that we've already provisioned, we need to have some sort of update management service like WSUS or System Center in place to manage those updates. And of course, we might also use System Center the Configuration Manager, Pixie Boot, and MDT to do the deployment, deploy a task schedule, so on. So the management of the operating system is basically you do provisioning, fire and forget, and then you have management tools in the back that maintain and update the operating system itself. And then after we've done with deploying the operating system, we need to deploy the applications, which can either be part of the image itself. So on the virtual machine template that we create, we install most of the base applications that we use, like Office, maybe, line of business applications, and so on. Or we have a blank golden image, we deploy virtual machines, and then we have some sort of deployment tool on the top, which then deploy the applications, which might be System Center, might use group policy, might use some sort of script, desired state configuration, and so on. There's a lot of tools that we can use to install applications here. Now, what's going to happen when we start installing applications and so on? Just going to use my little clicker here. So we get a lot of applications installed. They write some registry entries. They write a bunch of files to the file system. They might also write some DLL files or any dependencies that they need, like Visual C# library 2010, everybody, or .NET framework, something. Most of the applications require some sort of software dependency. Now, some applications might not work well with each other. So some applications require some specific version of .NET, while other applications require a new version. They might not function properly in the same environment. And another issue that we have is, for instance, patch management. So when we deploy the application, it's installed, and then we need to do an update of the application. So how do we do that? We can either use the deployment tool again, use an MSI package, deploy a new version, and hope it might work. Hopefully it works, might not as well. So the application lifecycle management might become an issue. And of course, as I mentioned, the software dependency on different requirements, so on. Has anybody here used any type of registry cleaner tool in their life on their personal computer? There we go. There's a reason why those exist, because when you install an application, you rely on the vendor that when you do an uninstall afterwards, that it actually cleans up the mess. Most cases it doesn't, but hopefully it does. But unless it doesn't do that, you get huge registry entry, huge registry entry, or might also clean up after itself on the file system as well. So you might get a bloated virtual machine, or a machine with different registry entries or disk entries. So as I mentioned, we can either deploy template or deploy application as part of the base image. But if we deploy or if we install too many applications on the base image, we might get a bloated image, which might not serve the purpose, or we can use the deployment tool afterwards. So those are some of the issues that we face when using the way we do it today. So how can we address these issues? So we can continue as we've done before. It's worked the last 10 years, so why not continue doing it? Status quo, as we say. Or we can start looking at application virtualization to address some of the issues, thinking about the software dependencies. Now, you need to have you need to have servers with the same, or some applications which doesn't work well together, but you need to have them on the same server. Or you need some other way to manage the application lifecycle management in terms of imaging and so on, where application layering comes into play. So first thing I'm going to talk about is application virtualization. Anybody played Commodore 64? The two guys in the left corner screen comes to mind when I think about App-V, because App-V is basically bubbles. So instead of installing an application on an operating system, you do a capturing process which captures the entire application, including the file system, registry entries, and maybe even the dependencies that they need inside a isolated package. So when you install an application virtualization package on a virtual machine or a machine, you don't actually do the installation, you just add a package and it's added. So it's completely isolated from let's just say registry and file or way. So there's no, if you have an application which has a malware installed, App-V or FinApp is not going to help you anyway, isolating the file or reads and writes going down to the file system. They can still do bad things, but it's more of isolating. Let's say we have two versions of, let's say you have Adobe Reader installed, Adobe Reader 11. So what happens when you try to install Adobe Reader 12? It's going to say that you have an older version and you can do an upgrade, right? But using App-V, we can have Adobe Reader version 11 inside an isolated package, and we can have Adobe Reader 12 in another package. So we can run multiple versions at the same time. So now we can still use templates to deploy our virtual machines, or we can use App-V or even FinApp to deploy applications on the top. Now, also using application virtualization, we have some a little bit more flexibility in terms of delivering applications. So we can add the packages to the virtual machine, or we can even stream them from a network share. Kind of like running Office 365 Pro Plus. It's click to run. It's can also use streaming. Now, most applications are isolated. We can define an isolation layer or define how it should work. If the application is going to read and write into the isolated container, or if it's allowed to go directly to the file system underneath. So this is something we can define when we're doing the packaging or capturing sequence. So, advantages. No installation required, right? We just add package after we created the virtual package. We fix a lot of the application conflicts when in regards to different requirements that it has. Multiple runtime environments that we can have multiple versions running at the same time. Easier update management. So let's say we need to update Adobe Reader to the latest version, and we're using streaming. We can just update the package from the network share. Next time the users start Adobe Reader, they're getting the latest version. But there are also some disadvantages, because if you're doing streaming, for instance, you need to think about the bandwidth requirements in order to get a good user experience. I/O requirements as well, because when you're using application virtualization, you're adding an extra complexity to the virtual or to the file system. And also, in case of App-V, you require a bit more infrastructure. I'm going to come back to that a bit later, but the most important part, or the hardest part with doing application virtualization, is the sequencing part. The part where you actually try to isolate an application inside a virtual package. So that's the, we can use App-V for Chrome and Firefox. It's simple, but when you have more, or when you have larger, more complex applications, the sequencing part takes a lot longer time. So I know a lot of people that's lost a lot of hair after doing a lot of sequencing, and especially in the health sector. And of course, there are some applications that we actually cannot virtualize. Some, for instance, some applications including device drivers, boot services, things that are part of the kernel. So we also have, for instance, VPN clients or firewall, host-based firewalls. They often include their own filter driver as part of the networking stack and so on. And since application virtualization is running on top of the operating system, mostly in form of a service or an agent, it's kind of hard to do capturing. So anyway, let's get head on over to App-V, which is Microsoft's version of application virtualization, also known as SoftGrid and SoftResidency and so on, before it became App-V. It's part of the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. It is also included as part of the RDS license, actually. And there are more ways we can deploy App-V. We can either use it the infrastructure way, so we have the App-V components, the reporting servers, the publishing service and management service, running on a standalone server. It has its own database. Can also do usage tracking and so on. We can also, we don't need to have the full infrastructure mode. We can use it standalone, which means that we're basically just installing the agents and deploying packages from a network share. And then we use PowerShell on top to publish the packages directly to the users. So in that case, we just use the sequencing machine, which is a clean virtual machine. We install the sequencing agent, we do capturing of the package, and then we just deploy the package on a file system and use PowerShell scripts to copy the package down and run the applications. Another thing is that we can also leverage System Center Configuration Manager, because we can just add the packages to the distribution point, and you can use the Configuration Manager agent on the each host to add the application. It's also part of more and more vendors are actually adding App-V integration to their own deployment tools, so you don't need to have a App-V infrastructure. In that case, you just need to use the deployment tool and just add the packages. And as I mentioned, we can use this standalone. I just need the App-V client installed. There are two specific agents that we have. App-V client for Windows client operating system, or we have one App-V RDS-based client as well, which works on terminal servers and so on. And there are two ways we can deliver a package. We can use the cache mode, meaning that we store a package on network share, The agent picks up the package, downloads it, and stores it into the cache of the App-V client. Or we have something called shared content store, which basically is the streaming way of delivering packages to agents, which is quite useful if you have a non-persistent environment running on terminal services. So the cool thing about App-V is that we can use it many types of ways. There's a huge community around App-V, a lot of free recipes as such for packaging different applications. It's part of the licensing agreement or for RDS. Large community, as I mentioned. And there's a lot of free tools around there as well, which makes it a lot easier to do the deployment and such instead of doing scripts and so on. But also some cons to it. For instance, in many cases, I would like to have a way to virtualize Internet Explorer from an older version to a later version, or from virtualize an older version of Internet Explorer when I'm doing OS migration, for instance. Because in many cases, in many businesses, they need to have an older version of Internet Explorer in order to support a specific application that they have. So in many cases, they go on over to Citrix or VMware to fix that issue. Of course, it requires an agent installed. I very much like to have App-V as part of the default operating system. Such. And of course, the I/O requirements as well. Hopefully that's not the fire alarm. Then we head on over to FinApp from VMware. Much more simpler as such. Doesn't require any dedicated infrastructure. You basically have the software that you use to do the packaging. And then when you create a package, you can either have an executable file or it creates an MSI file. So it's self-contained within the package that we have. So basically, let's say I want to package Chrome or Firefox. Use the FinApp packager, specify isolation mode and how it should be updated and so on. Deploy the package to a share, and then I can run the executable file, and then I can see that FinApp is actually starting from within the executable. So no agents installed or required. And another cool thing is that FinApp or VMware actually have support for virtualizing Internet Explorer. So I'm going to show that afterwards, how we can run older version of Internet Explorer on a later version of Windows Server. And also VMware has a larger support matrix for when it comes to supported operating systems. So go back to Windows XP. But App-V version 5 has a much more narrow support matrix. And also, we can also specify that the package should be automatically updated within the configuration file. Basically, it's going to look on a network share and see if there are any new packages available. So that's also contained within the package. So the bad thing about FinApp is it doesn't have any centralized management as such. Only way to use it and if you want administration or management, you need to have Horizon in some form. No PowerShell support. There is an SDK, so there are some community PowerShell commands that we can use, but there's nothing built into the FinApp package. There's no built-in application usage tracking, but since it creates an executable file or an MSI package, we can leverage Configuration Manager, for instance, to do the application tracking. So, application layering. So what application layering actually does is it's actually a way to merge virtual disks inside a virtual machine. Or in physical, we can also do it physical, but on some occasions. But when we do FinApp or App-V, we create a package, virtual package. It's a file. When we do application layering, it consists of many virtual disks, which then gets merged when the user logs in, and applications are part of the different layers that we have. So we have something, we can have application layers, which have application install, which is a virtual disk. In most cases, it's read-only, so no changes that can be made to the application. We can also add a personalization layer, which might be a profile for a user or user-installed applications, which can be read and write, so the user can install their own applications. So when they log in, they get a list of different layers based on dependencies or group memberships in Active Directory, and they get attached when the user logs in. So let's say we have an applications layer which has Adobe Reader installed, Firefox and Chrome, and which is then attached to Active Directory group. User logs in, applications are attached to the file system and merged. So this is basically what application layering does. So we can then separate different applications into different layers, and as such, we get when we need to do an update to an application, we just update the application layer, and then the layer is then redistributed to the virtual machines. And in some cases, we can also do operating system layering, which means that we can have multiple versions of a virtual machine stored in a layer, which means we can then mix and match as we want to. So a much more simpler application process. Instead of doing the sequencing part and trying to isolate an application, we just attach a virtual disk to a virtual machine, and we install the application as we traditionally would, just run the wizard next finish. And then all the files, registries, and dependencies are then stored in the virtual disk, which is then attached. And then you reboot the machine, and the process is done. Another important thing to remember is that when we're doing application layering, we don't have an isolation. So applications run like normal. There's no way to do isolation in application layering. So they behave like normal applications. So there's the installation of applications is pretty much the same as we would always do. But now we can have one image containing all our line of business applications, for instance. And also, in most cases, this works with drivers, startup services, and we can also manage personal data as well. But depending on the vendor, there are some specific hypervisor requirements if you want to do OS layering and so on. No application isolation. Even though there's, I'm going to come back to that, but VMware announced a new version for about 2 days ago, which makes my presentation on AppVolumes pretty much obsolete, but I'm going to come back to that. And of course, it introduces another layer of complexity and yet another product in our infrastructure. And of course, depending on the vendor, there are some things that cannot be placed within a layer. So let's start with Unidesk, which is pretty much been around for 8 years or such. They've been doing layering for a long time. They have support for VMware, for Hyper-V. They connect with FinApp, Horizon, RDS. They can also do application layering in Azure as well. So instead of having many virtual machines running on top of Azure, we can have one image containing our 2012 R2 operating system, and we can have application layers attaching to them on the top. It's a simple architecture. We have a management appliance running Linux, where we do all the administration and deployment and so on. We have something called a cache point, which stores all the layers. So Unidesk can do application layering, personalization layering, and operating system layers. So when we connect it to a hypervisor, first thing we do is we have an installation machine, which is basically the golden or the template that we use. So we install 2012 R2. Then we do a capture of the virtual machine, store it in an OS layer, and then we can create another installation machine and start creating application layers on top. So if, let's say we have these 4 virtual machines, which then use one OS layer and one application layer. When we do an update to the operating system layer, the 4 virtual machines are going to reboot depending on the maintenance schedule, and then they would have the same updates and so on as the OS or the updated OS layer has. Same goes for applications. So I can then update a specific application layer. Virtual machines will reboot, and they would then have the latest versions of the application layer, all the applications installed. So they can layer pretty much anything, integrate with VMware, ESX, and so on. Problem, or not a problem, but things I don't like with Unidesk is that they have a Silverlight-based console. They don't have instant application delivery because they integrate within the hypervisor, which means the virtual machine needs to restart in order to get the latest versions of specific applications, for instance. And it only works on virtual machines, not on physical devices. But again, last week, Unidesk announced that there's a lot of new features coming in upcoming version. So this might change, or it's going to change. I just don't know yet when it's going to be. So, Citrix AppDisk. There's a star behind there. That's because it's not released yet. It's coming in upcoming version, which is coming in this month or the next. So I'm not going to show a demo of this, but this is pretty much the architecture behind it and the way Citrix wants it to work. So if you have Citrix XenDesktop, version 7, and so on, and you're using either machine creation services or provisioning services, which is Citrix way to do single image management when delivering terminal services or VDI. So that's the OS layer that Citrix has. You use the desktop delivery controller or the PVS machine to do the OS layering part. And then you have PVD, which then contains the personalization layer. And then you have AppDisks, which will then be the application layer feature that Citrix has, which will then either integrate into Citrix Studio, or it can be used against machine creation services or PVS. It's going to work on Xen Server or ESX. But basically the same principle. You have a preparation machine where you add a virtual hard disk, you install applications, and then Citrix is going to do a capture process on the virtual hard drive, take the VHD file, store it somewhere, and then when we deploy virtual machines using PVS or MCS, the virtual disk is going to be attached. So when the user logs in, he gets the applications which are part of the VHD file. Advantages, or disadvantages, sorry. Requires a Citrix environment, of course. Virtual machines only, no instant application delivery, and of course, depending on the licensing you have, this is only for fixing applications. So Citrix already has the OS, already has the profile. So this is pretty much to fix the application part of it. And then we have VMware Up Volume. So this slide is based on version 2.10, which is the latest version. And then VMware announced version 3 is coming for 2 days ago. So I could update the slides, but I didn't have time. But it's pretty simple. You have an AppVolumes manager, which you basically do all administration. It's a HTML5 based console. You log in, define application stacks, which are essentially application layers, define which machines or user objects the application stack should be applied to. You have instant application delivery. What it means is that, let's say a user says, hey, I need Office 2016. Okay, I can then attach Office 2016 layer to the user. User logs off, logs in again. There we go. So that's instant app delivery in the layering function, or in the layering sense. And you have the AppVolumes agent installed on every host. You need to use AppVolumes. And AppVolumes can also function in a physical environment, as long as you're using non-persistent physical devices. Which means that you're either using VMware Mirage or some form of streaming service down to a physical device, or you have Windows embedded, which is a non-persistent device. And then you have something called VHD in-guest mount, which basically the service runs, attach the VHD file as part of the operating system, and then the user logs in. So this is the part of the demo I'm going to show to you afterwards. But it's simple to set up. You also have something called writable volumes, which is the way to do profile management, which allows users to install their own applications and the profile stored in a specific VHD file. It's kind of like the same with if you've used user profile disks in RDS 2012. You have a VHD file which attaches on mount or on login, and the user can store the profile there. But in order to do an integration with hypervisors, from VMware perspective, you also need VMware. No support for other hypervisors. And of course, there are some weird requirements for physical devices. But as I mentioned, application layering doesn't do isolation yet. That's what VMware is introducing in the latest version. So isolation is part of the newer version, and of course some other new features as well, which I actually don't remember. So, demo time. Are there any questions before I go into demo? Good. I'm guessing everybody's waiting for lunch anyway, so. Just gonna switch the screen here. So I'm gonna jump back and forth between a couple of virtual machines. There we go. So what I'm going to do first is going to show App-V. So I'm just going to get this down for a moment and do into full screen. Okay, so I have some pre-configured App-V packages stored on this virtual machine. So I'm just going to go into the specific share that I have them. So I have Firefox. You see here we have an App-V package file, which contains the entire virtual file system and registry. So if I use the sequencer to open the specific package, file, open, I point to the specific package. Or I can use Chrome, for instance. I can then go in and see what the capturing process captured of registry. So this is the virtual registry. I can go into the virtual file system of the specific application itself. I can see what kind of services which are part of the application when I've installed it. So this needs to be run on a clean virtual machine. No additional application installed. You run the sequencer, install the application while the sequencer is running, and you're good to go. So hopefully it works the first time. So now that I have my applications sequenced and are available on a network share, I want to install them on a specific another machine. Just need to wait for the service to go down. There we go. Hopefully I logged in with the right user. I believe I did. I just need to fix the resolution here because Workstation wants to adjust the size according to my physical device. There we go. Now it's going to look a lot better. So I'm going to start PowerShell. Go into IC because then we can see all the specific commandlets, or maybe I can just right. So if I go into the App-V client module, I get a bunch of different modules because I've installed the RDS client for App-V on this virtual machine. I'm just going to double check and see what kind of client mode I'm running in. Can anybody see on the screen now? Is it okay? Yeah. So what I've just done now is wanted to check if shared content store mode is enabled on the client, which is basically the streaming feature, because that can be enabled or disabled per client. So by default now it's not enabled, which means that when I add an App-V package now, it's going to download the package into the cache and run from the cache. So next I'm going to do is going to add the specific applications. So I have a finished script here which basically says three things: add client package, from where, and then publish the application to the user. All right, forgot. So now you can see the applications are being added directly to my desktop. So if I go in now and check App-V client package, I can see I have the three different applications installed. If I start Notepad, I can see that it's starting. I can go in again, just remove that the client package. And if I look at Notepad now, just scroll a bit up here, I can see it says percentage loaded 100%, which means it's now fully stored in the cache and running from the cache. And I can also see it's published directly to this user, while it means that I can use it. I have a specific version number. So in case I do an upgrade, I can also change the version ID, specific path it's stored on, and also says it's currently in use. So if I go into the cache of the virtual machine, which is stored under a very secret folder, and I have now the custom ID for the package, which is 53 something. So now I can browse into the virtual file system and see all the specific applications here. But now it's running directly from the local disk on the virtual machine. So let's do a little bit change. So what I want to do now is remove all the applications. Oh, I have to close this first. I'm going to run it again. There we go. Make sure it's gone. There we go. And then I'm going to change the configuration mode to 1, which means now I want to use the streaming feature, right? Then I'm just going to do a quick restart of the App-V client. There we go. I'm going to run this again. Hopefully it works. There we go. So when I start Notepad again now, it should start. There we go. And just scroll up here and find Notepad. There we go. But now it says percentage loaded 1, even though it's running, right? So either something wrong or this is working as it should. So I go back to the cache. I look at the package ID, which is again 50 something. And now if I go into the virtual file system, you can see on the icon graphics that it's kind of grayed out. If I right click on the executable file, go into properties, I can see the size is 2 megabytes, but its size on disk is 0 because everything is now streaming from an SMB share. But this has been using App-V standalone mode, so no backend infrastructure or server components. So while I'm logging out, quiz question: what's the default Internet Explorer installed on 2012 R2? Anyone? Internet Explorer version 11. Just need to remember to type the right. All right. So I'm not going to open the sequencer for FinApp because it's not much to see, but what I want to show you is that I have a pre-packaged application. So I have Internet Explorer, older version of it. So this is the, gonna call it the work desk after we've done the package. So this is the project area where it stores everything located to the Internet Explorer package application. So here we can see all the different map or folders that it writes to. And I have the package ini file, which basically contains everything about the virtual package itself. So here I can define the isolation mode. I can define something called AppSync parameters, which basically tells the package where to look for updates in case you replace a FinApp package with a newer version. And you can also change MSI-based or the MSI, sandbox properties, and so on. But in the end, all you need is go into the bin file. We have an executable or a .dat file, or we have an MSI package that we can install. So I have Internet Explorer placed on my desktop here. Now, as I said, FinApp package is self-contained, so you saw the logo in the right lower corner screen, which was when firing up FinApp. And this is an older version of Internet Explorer running on 2012 R2. So this is running Internet Explorer 9. So the way I did is because I installed Windows 7 before Service Pack 1, virtual machine. Then I can download Internet Explorer 9 as a download file. And when I run the installation of Internet Explorer, the capturing process is running in the back. So then you're able to virtualize Internet Explorer as a package. And just gonna jump out again into another user. To show the update feature. So I also have a FinApp package for 7-zip. Just going to create a new folder. So as I said, we can either create an MSI file or an executable file. And then I can, for instance, use a standalone tool from VMware called FinReg, which then adds the file associations and creates the shortcuts and so on. So I can just start the command line. And I then need to remember where that damn backslash is on English keyboard. I usually find it pretty fast. There we go now. Oh, come on. Okay, let's do it an old-fashioned way. Oh, there it is. I just need to remember. Okay. FinReg, and then R, and then 7-zip. So just need to double check that I don't have 7-zip already added. So it's not here. All we have is the App-V packages. So when I run this command, it's going to add 7-zip as an application. So if I go into Control Panel, I go into Programs, I can see that I have 7-zip running as installed using VMware FinApp. I can change the file description if I want to. I can start it, FinApp triggers. And now I have 15.12 installed. But I've also configured the package ini file to do AppSync, which means it should update to a later version next time the user runs. Now I have the latest version. So what I basically did when I created the package, I specified AppSync parameters. Go and look at that network share if there are new packages available. So when next time the user starts the application, it gets the latest package and starts running it. So then I'm going to jump into AppVolumes. As I mentioned, it's a pretty simple setup. I have the AppVolumes manager where I do all the management and so on. which can either be used standalone or as a part of a Horizon environment. Just need to wait for the dashboards to be ready. So if I go into volumes now, I'm going to have some different application layers and writable volumes appear. So here I have an application volume, which I can see is now attached to a specific location. And I have two applications actually. I have Java installed and Adobe Reader installed in application layer. So it's basically a virtual disk which contains two applications, right? So I've also assigned it or specified an assignment to it, specified some machine accounts and user accounts using in-mount VHD. So for instance, if I wanted to create a new application layer, I can go into Create App Stack, specify a name and location, just give it something random to think about. Wait for completion. So afterwards, I'm going to need to choose a provisioning machine. So that's where the VHD is going to initially mount, and then we can do the installation to the VHD file, and then it does the capturing process and stores it in the VHD file. So that's pretty much it. So if I now, for instance, go back to another virtual machine that I had running here, or that's the one, sorry. So I'm just going to log in here. Just need to double check that the AppVol user had an attachment to it. Go into the directory. As you can see, it's a service running now when the user logs in to check what kind of applications are assigned to this user. So I can go into the AppVol user and see that, okay, this user has application stack 1 attached to it, which was Adobe Reader and Java. Take some time for it. It's finished loading the first time after initial setup. But I can also go into the writable volumes. And when I create a writable volume, there are two ways I can do this. Just going to specify a user. Wait for it to finish run. So there are two kind of templates that I can choose from. One is user installed applications only, which basically means it's a VHD file where the user can install their own applications, but the profile itself is excluded from the VHD file. Another profile is the user installed applications plus the profile itself. So users can install applications, and it also takes part of the profile. So why is this taking so long? You know, it worked fine an hour ago before we started the demo. Just gonna double check that I didn't assign any other application stacks to it. Might be the case. I can also just think I can log into this one. Well, I don't have attached anything there. Okay then. I didn't sacrifice enough goats for this demo to work, so it might be the case. So in that case, I'm just gonna jump into Unidesk while that thing is running. So this is running on another virtual lab that I have. Installed on Hyper-V. So this is the Silverlight console I talked about, which I don't like, but as I said, Unidesk can also do OS layering and application layering and personalization layering. So what I have is that I have a OS layer running, or OS layer which has multiple versions of a different machine. So we have an RDS host, I have some web servers, and so on. And I have some specific application layers which has Adobe Reader, and one has Office installed on layer. So it's basically VHD files. So let's say I want to create a new virtual machine, a new terminal server, using a specific OS layer and some specific applications. So I can go into create session host. Just gonna resize this so it, as I mentioned, this is the bad part about Unidesk console. I think I need to log out and log in again. Doesn't like the resizing part. So let's go and try again. Go to session host, create session host. Why is this happening to me? Come on, it worked earlier today. Okay then, let's do it this way. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. This worked like fine 20 minutes before I entered this hole. But anyway, maybe it worked better in Chrome. But what's going to happen when I create a virtual machine, if we go into Hyper-V and check a specific session host that's been created by Unidesk, go into settings, go into the specific disk, we can see we have a bunch of VHD files which are attached, not attacked, but attached, using a bunch of differential disks. So when the operating system is finished booting and user logs in, all the VHD files are merged to a single file system, and then the applications are then attached atop to it. So if I, for instance, log into this virtual machine, which consists of one base OS layer, so clean install, and I have the specific application layers installed on top. So you can see I have Adobe Reader, Firefox, and VLC, and it's part of the application layer. So if I go into computer management of this specific virtual machine. Another one. There we go. And I go into disk management. I can see I have a bunch of disks that are attached to this virtual machine because it's the different parts of the virtual machine. You have the OS layer, application layers, and of course my own personal profile layer attached on the bottom. So let's head on back to the AppVolumes part of it. There we go. So this is now an virtual machine which has an application volume layer attached to it. I have an Acrobat Reader which was part of the app stack. I also have Java installed, which is also part of the app stack. But as I mentioned, they function like normal applications would. So if, for instance, go into Internet Explorer, I can also see that the Java plugins are installed natively and appear as they should. You know, I get a message here. I can go into the file system and I can see that they're stored in the normal location on the program files and so on. I can also see when I go into disk management of this virtual machine, of course, if I have the correct rights. If I go into disk management of the same virtual machine as I did at the Unidesk, I can also see there's a VHD file attached, which is read-only, which is the application layer. So here you can see I have the read-only application stack attached to this virtual machine, which then has my applications installed. So, as I mentioned, also I'll added a last-minute stuff to this presentation, or not the presentation, but demo, which is application containers. Everybody's heard a buzzword about containers, right? Windows Server is coming with it. You don't need to have many multiple machines. You have a base layer, and then you can share resources on top with its own virtual network stack on top of it. So I want to talk a little bit about a product called Turbo, which pretty much does application containers on top of Windows. So for instance, I'm going to run, just going to type Turbo. I'm just going to run Internet Explorer 6. Has anybody tried to run Internet Explorer 6 on Windows 10? You can't. You can't try, it doesn't work installing it. So here I have Internet Explorer running on top of Windows 10 as an application container. So you download an image from Turbo, runs a container on the bottom, and you have applications stored on top. So I can also set up, if I go into the Turbo console, I can also add different versions of web servers, database servers, and so on. So they're moving forward to make more and more applications available. So this is basically running directly from their own repository. So I can create my own repository I want to, and add my own applications that I want to have installed in the container. So for instance, I can go into servers, I can go into web servers, and then I can choose a bunch of different web servers that I want running on top of a container. So this is not running the default Windows container server which is coming in Windows Server 2016. This is something that's created from on their own. So this opens up a lot of new possibilities, because with App-V or maybe even FinApp, you can't do a lot of older versions that require OS-specific stuff. And this will also be complete application isolation, because the application itself doesn't have any rights to the file system and processes running. It's self-contained within its own virtualized layer. So now I can go back to the good old times when I have Internet Explorer 6. So, to summarize, just gonna change this back to as it should. When to use what? Application virtualization. You get isolated applications, not physically, but in a virtual perspective, which means you can have multiple applications running at the same time from the same vendor, different versions of Office, Adobe Reader, and so on. Some application capability fixes, and so on. Flexible delivery methods. You can use streaming, or you can use the cache mode. With application layering, what you get is a simpler way to do capturing. You don't have to do the tough sequencing part that you do with virtualization. Can also include the profile management or the OS layering of it. And also makes application lifecycle a lot simpler. So no more do you need to do MSI scripts to do an update. You just need to update the base layer, and then you can just redeploy the layer. And of course, moving forward, as I mentioned, application containers. It's going to happen a lot in that space. Microsoft is also moving forward with something called Project Sentinel, which is kind of trying to migrate the old Windows installer to a App-V kind of format. So there's more baseline to create an application lifecycle. So when you actually remove an application from Windows, it's going to be removed everything. So no stuff stored in the file system or in the registry after you remove an application. It's kind of like moving Windows installer applications to the Windows Store. So when you add and remove an application from the store on your phone, for instance, you know it's completely removed from the phone. So I'm getting close to my time, close to the end. Any questions? If not, thank you for your time.